If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniak. This was back in the early 2000s when I was living in South Philadelphia. I was 17 and stupid, as you'll soon find out. I worked at a Rita's Water Ice in the suburbs every summer for the last 4 years or so. Before moving to South Philly, I was able to pick up a job at the new Rita's there, quickly making some great friends. One friend in particular, Heather, was my dancing and singing partner on those rainy days we had, where the radio was there and we could speak to each other. We were listening to Q102 loudly, having a great time when we get a call. I turn down the music and answer. It's a guy named Joe, saying he was from Q102 and wanted to hear about the cute girls at Rita. I put it on speaker and said to my friend, and I engaged playfully flirting with some random guy. He promised to give me a shout out on the radio. Within a few minutes of hanging up, we hear a strange interruption and the same guy's voice say, "Girls at Rita's," and it jumps back to whatever was playing before. That should have been enough to know this was weird. Before we could even speak about it, the phone rang again. Joe said if we heard it. We said yes. Said it was so fast, and he said that they were having connection problems. We believed him. Heather jumped on the opportunity and said we could go to meet him on a Sunday. As weird as it seemed at the time, I figured we'd be alright because we're together. Eventually Sunday comes, and I'm waiting at the spot to meet him. Minutes before our meet-up time, Heather calls and says she's not going. I yelled at her that I was standing out there like an idiot and why did she not tell me earlier? She said she is sorry and to let her know how it goes. Needless to say, I was pissed off now and very nervous. I was about to turn and walk home when an old car drives by with the windows rolled down and the guy says, "Where's the other one?" Joe was pale, with small but thick glasses and red hair. He really was not at all what I expected. And I just figured, maybe that's a whole radio voice thing people speak about. I knew something was off. I tell him Heather's not coming, and I should probably go. He said he'd love to chat, and tells me to get in the car. Now I know what you're thinking, why? I was too scared to stand up for myself. So I get in, ask where we're going. He tells me he needs to run home quick, then we can grab lunch and talk. I tried to ask him about working for the radio, but after all this time, I can't recall how he dodged my questions so easily, but he did. I never got my answer until I was on my way to his home. Now at this time, I didn't know Philly very well. I knew South Philly decently, but outside of that, I was very unfamiliar. We drove for about 20 minutes until we reached a dodgy looking neighborhood of tiny, squished together row homes. This is most of Philly, but in my memory, those were exceptionally small and creepy looking. As my brain is telling me to do something, I follow him in his home anyway. Me now is getting sick to my stomach just thinking about how stupid I was then. He opens the door. That's when it hits me. To this day, I don't know anything about radio and how he did what he did, but his entire living room is covered with wires. His walls were lined with at least dozens tangled up together, with several phones on the coffee table and sofa. I look around in horror, realizing just how stupid I was. What the hell was gonna happen to me? Why did he bring me here? Where is this going? He said to me to sit down. I did so in fear. Then his mother comes out from what I guess is a kitchen. Who the hell knows? Their rooms are a mess, just with wires everywhere. She just seems so excited to see me, as if she's been waiting for me forever. She starts asking me questions like how did Joe and I meet, or what I do for a living. I'm realizing that Joe probably isn't much older than I am because her questions are not geared towards somebody who's still in high school. Does she even know why all these wires are here? Does she know what the hell he's up to? My brain is frantically running with these questions. How many teenagers has he lured here before? What the hell is going on? After about 20 minutes of this, his mum is trying to get me to eat something and to tell her about my life. Joe stared at me from the sofa. It sounds so weird. My brain jumps into its only action it can at this point. I have to take this call. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I run outside. I start yelling to the non-existent person on the line, asking what's going on, where are you, I'll be there in a sec. I walk back in, tell Joe that I have to go home immediately because my dad's in hospital. He squints at me, not sure if I was lying or not. And the only thing I can think to do at this point, I yell out now. He jumped up, grabs his keys, heading for the door. I followed without even a nod to his mother, who stared at me as I left. So awkward. Not a word was spoken on the drive. He said, "Where do I live?" I instructed him to drop me off exactly where he picked me up. As I got out of the car, he said to hand over my number. A few weeks went by, and I honestly put most of it out of my mind. I go to open up Rita's one day, and the paper was tossed to the side at the gate. I pick it up, and guess who's on the cover? Good old innocent Joe arrested for luring teenage girls to his house, then assaulting them. To this day, I don't even know how I mustered up enough bravery to act the way which I did. Even now, I can't believe my instinctions at the time, leading me to that exact moment. Maybe I was the first person he tried to lure. All I know is he knew exactly what he was gonna do, and I'm so thankful that he was actually caught, and I was not his victim.
I worked as a flight attendant for a few years, when I decided to take an extended sabbatical from college. There were a handful of let's not meet situations I encountered, but one in particular still makes my skin crawl more than any other. I was born and raised in Texas, but had moved to New York when I was 21. So when I found out at the beginning of the week-long trip that I'd have a couple of overnights in Austin, I was super excited to go to my home state for a few days. My brother lived just north of the city, and we planned to hang out and go to dinner the night I arrived when he got off work. And the following day we were going to meet up with our dad, who lived about an hour away. So I get to the hotel downtown, the crew and I check in, and then we head off into our rooms. Short elevator ride and I get to mine, where not even 5 minutes later there's a loud, hard knock at the door. It was only around 1 or 2 PM, and I hadn't called either my dad or brother to let them know I was in town yet, so they wouldn't know what room. I assumed it was maybe one of my crewmates, so I headed to the door. Before even making it to the door, however, there was a loud, male voice on the other side booming, "The front desk sent me about the bathroom problem you called in." Before trying to open the door, "Unlock the door and open it, miss. I need in now." I froze in my tracks. I hadn't even been in the bathroom yet, let alone called anything to the front desk. I'm a petite chick, and while I take no rubbish from anyone despite my size, I still, on the side of caution, you know. Slowly inching towards the door to look out the peephole, all I could tell was the man on the other side was at least 6 foot tall and easily over double my weight. No way in hell I was going to unlock the door. I responded to the guy, telling him he must have the wrong room. He continued pounding on the door, while constantly turning the handle, telling me no, he needs in, and was getting in the room one way or another. I panicked, but thankfully had the sense to grab the phone and call the front desk. The desk confirmed that they neither had sent anyone up to my room, nor had they received any call about the bathroom. The entire time, this guy was still determined to get in my room, pounding and yelling. Luckily for me, the front desk had dispatched security to my floor. When the security officers step off the elevator a few seconds later, I can hear them in the hall approach and ask the guy who he was, what he was doing, and telling him he had to leave the hotel. He immediately gets hostile and aggressive towards them, and the front desk clerk I'm still on the phone with tells me the police have been called and are on their way. In the meantime, I'm trapped in my room, scared. Long story short, the cops show up and pretty quickly manage to arrest the guy for trespassing and criminal menacing or something. I later found out that the guy was also wanted in connection to a string of break-ins and violent assaults in Austin. He had seen and stalked me from the minute I entered the hotel lobby. Apparently, I was exactly the type of victim he liked. Nothing else happened after that, but it still rattled me for the rest of my stay in that hotel.
I'm a 22-year-old now, and this happened back when I was just 5 years old. Even though it was so long ago, I remember it so vividly. My older brother and I had just been dropped off at a bus stop by the school bus after school. He was only a year older than me. We lived in a shifty trailer park in Virginia. All the other kids had parents waiting for them at the bus stop. My brother and I did not. Our mother never knew or cared where we were, unfortunately. We stayed around the bus stop playing with sticks, and the other kids and the bus quickly dissipated. A few minutes passed with us playing with our sticks when I hear a man's voice say, "Hey." I look up, and there's an old blue truck in front of us on the road. The man inside says, "I'm looking for my dog. Have you seen it?" Me being the huge animal-loving kid says, "I know, but I want to help." He said, "Oh, maybe if you come and help, we'll definitely find him. You get some candy too." Yes, I know, the classic candy offer. I for some reason was never coached on stranger danger either. I began walking around the front of the truck to get into the passenger side when, all of a sudden, my arm was yanked very hard by my brother screaming "run," and pulled me and ran us all the way down the side of the road where we hid behind a dumpster. The old truck immediately sped off as my brother and I ran away. A man with obvious bad intentions wouldn't have sped away. If my brother wasn't there that day, I would have absolutely gotten into that car and surely never been seen again. We waited there behind the dumpster for a few minutes, not really sure what to do, running the rest of the way home.
So this happened a couple of years ago when I was a sophomore in high school. I had a boyfriend named Fisher. He wasn't the most attractive, but he was nice, so we started talking and eventually decided to become a couple. Things started off normally as they usually do, but soon I started to become overwhelmed by his attention. He never wanted me to see my best friend or do anything that didn't involve him. Eventually, he would want to talk on the phone as soon as we parted for the night and wouldn't let me go to bed. One night, I couldn't take it and told him that I was going to bed, then hung up. About half an hour later, I hear a knock at my basement door. I move the curtains a little and he's standing out there. He refused to leave until I let him in. This went on for months and months. He would stalk me at work and home. If I didn't answer, he would call my parents and ask where I was and what I was doing. At one point, I tried to break up with him and he started freaking out and saying he was going to kill himself and it was all my fault. I was afraid to leave him and afraid to go anywhere thinking he would follow me. One of the times he showed up in the middle of the night, I let him in, hoping I could convince him to leave. Wrong move. He went into my brother's room, picked up his butterfly knife and began playing with it. I was getting a little freaked out by then, so I asked him to leave. As I went to walk away, he grabbed my arm really tight and wrenched me back towards him while still holding the knife. I hit him in the face and started screaming at him to get out of my house. The next day, he went on like nothing happened. I broke up with him over the phone the next day. That wasn't the end though. A couple of days later, I was hanging out with a guy friend and my ex showed up and tried to talk to me. My guy friend knew everything that had happened, so he offered his house for a place to avoid my ex. We quickly left and walked there, only to realise my ex had followed us. We went inside and looked out the window to see my ex sitting on his front steps. I then got a call from my mum saying my ex had told her that I was in danger and going to a strange man's house. When I told her the truth, she called him back and flipped out on him. He still wouldn't leave. He started yelling at us through the window that he wouldn't leave unless I came out and hugged him. He kept saying, "It's one little hug, and you owe me this." We finally got him to leave by threat of calling the police. This still isn't the end. The last main event with him was finding out he had been stealing my dirty socks and keeping them for his fetish. He offered them and my hoodie I'd just left at his place back. He said I could only get them if I came alone. I told him there was no way that was happening and that I was done with him for good. We went to the same high school, so I saw him for years, but we didn't have any interaction after that. When I was in high school, I worked as a cashier at a local grocery store. It was a pretty sweet gig because I worked with all of my friends from school, in addition to making friends from other high schools in the area. I mainly socialised with other high schoolers, but I was fairly friendly with all my co-workers, even the older ones in passing. There was one guy I worked with that would always come through my line to buy things for his break. He was probably in his mid-40s. I would always smile at him and ask how he was doing. He was perfectly friendly and seemed totally normal. I even found out that he was dating my friend's mum, which added an extra sense of security in my mind. I didn't pay much attention to people outside of my little world, so it didn't occur to me that I hadn't seen him for a while. Around this time, I started getting a ton of missed calls from an anonymous number. They always called while I was in school, so I never got to answer it. This was back in the day when I wasn't always being bombarded with spam calls like I am now, so these missed calls really stood out to me. The caller never left a message, but the calls always appeared to come in a barrage, a ton of missed calls in a short window of time. After a couple of weeks of dealing with these private calls, they finally called when I was available to answer after school. I was hanging out with my best friend, and she was already aware of this phantom caller, so we were both excited to put them on blast. I answered the call and put it on speakerphone. We were smiling and ready to troll this caller already. As we both began to speak, we both realised it was really creepy. I remember the smile falling from my friend's face, and I could feel my own disappear as well. The caller addressed me by name. It sounded like a man sobbing. I asked who it was and he said, "Tom." I was so uninvested in this guy that it took me a minute to realise who Tom was. Of course it was the older man I mentioned at the beginning of the story. Tom was crying and telling me how he was banned from the grocery store. He told me he couldn't step foot in the property. I asked him what happened and he went silent really quickly, paused and said, "Anyway." It was so dramatic and obviously suspicious that I can still hear the way he said it in my head. It was like straight out of a bad movie, how dramatic he was about it. He wouldn't tell me why he was banned, but he said he needed to call me and thank me for always giving him a smile and caring about him. He told me how much he missed me and spoke at length about how beautiful I was. I felt totally sick. I asked him how he got my number, and he said he wrote it a while down before, when I had posted a note on the employee bulletin board, offering to pick up people's extra hours. He had just been holding on to my number. He apologised for scaring me and told me he'd like to keep in touch. I told him I didn't have his number since he called me on private, not that I would call him anyway. This was my ploy to understand why he was calling private. He didn't offer me his number, he just said he'd call me back. I think I ultimately ended up hanging up on him out of fear. My friend and I just sat together, stunned, in silence. He was basically a stranger to me. A grown man crying to me about how beautiful my smile was and how much he missed me. I had several more missed calls over the following weeks, but never reconnected with him. These calls eventually stopped, and of course my phone number has changed a couple of times since then. Oh, and I confronted my friend, whose mother was dating him. She said they had recently broken up because he was crazy, but wouldn't divulge in any further details. Whatever, just stay away forever, please.
I recently moved into a fairly decent sized 2-bedroom home with a full basement where a lot of my family's not so important belongings are still stored in boxes to be sorted through. Our home resides in a quiet neighbourhood, but our elderly neighbours advised us on some sketchy figures wandering about late at night, as there's a section 2 or so blocks away where the houses have residents who shouldn't be there. Fast forward to maybe 2 weeks ago, I'd gone down the basement to sift through my items, noticing that a few random things on our tables, toolkits, binders, family pictures, etc., had been opened and threw about carelessly. Thinking another family member was sorting as well, I picked them up and went about my task. Now over the following week, I would hear strange banging coming from the basement, sort of like our washing machine lid being shut. Now, I'll admit I'm skitterish and my mind sometimes jumps to the worst possible outcome, so I become worried. Now during this time, I'm the only person home, so grab some pepper spray and go to check it out. Now our basement has 2 full rooms plus 2 adjoining smaller ones, one of which has a door that, myself, I have never opened. It is also barred by a beam of some sort, but the door stands slightly ajar. I assume it's just a small storage area. Upon turning on all the lights and cautiously walking around, I had seen that a few more of our belongings and boxes that weren't unpacked yet had been opened and were laying there on the floor. What concerned me most was that our basement door leads outside to the side of our house and it's unlocked. This is not something my family would have forgot. Further inspecting the basement proved that no one's inside, though I didn't pry it open. Telling my father about this, he said that the noises are probably the heater popping, and perhaps he forgot to lock the door while taking the trash out. I'm not so convinced on this, but I really hope I'm not correct in thinking that somebody may be in our home, but realistically, this is probably what's happened. I'll keep you all updated.
About 2 or 3 years ago during the spring, I was out for a weekend run along the river path in my city. It was about mid-morning, and seeing as there is a very popular restaurant shop facility close by, this trail is fairly well used. This morning there were small groups of people, not overly busy, but thankfully busy enough, otherwise the following encounter would have been a lot more scary than it was. I'm partway down the trail and I pass a guy walking, who just as I run past says, "Hello." I return a hello. Shortly after I pass him, I hear footsteps close behind me. I glance back, assuming it was another jogger and wanting to make sure they had enough room to pass. Nope, it was a guy I had just passed, and he was running behind me. An important thing to know is that he was not in running attire. He was wearing jeans, a warm, outdoor puffy vest, a scarf, and non-running shoes. I found him being behind me odd, since he had been walking the opposite direction as me, so he would have to turn around and run behind me. So I sped up my pace. Well, he sped up his pace too. So I sped up again, and so did he. I might add at this point that he sounded pretty winded, since I don't think he was a regular runner, and I kept increasing my speed. On the third time of his catching up to me, he proclaimed, "Got ya!" At this point, I had moved from thinking this was odd to being a bit frightened and unsure of what his intentions were, even though it was broad daylight in a public space. So I yelled over my shoulder, "Please leave me alone." He replied with, "Oh, sorry," which I thought would be the end of it. But no, he kept running behind me, very close. We were approaching a group of 3 people walking at this point, so I started jogging past them, but did a quick U-turn right behind them, yelled back at him, "Stop following me!" and sprinted back past them in the way I'd come. As I hoped, there was no way he could follow me now, without raising suspicion of the other people. So that's where the story ends. I've had a few bad experiences over the years, as I usually travel solo, and do a lot of things by myself in my own city. But this was one that really makes me wonder, what was he planning to do? Did he have ill intentions, or was he just mentally ill, or socially awkward, and actually thought there was nothing wrong with chasing someone? If it was place or time of day with less people, would something worse have happened? I thankfully never met him again. I don't remember how old I was, just that I was small enough to fit in the front baby seat of a grocery cart. That would put us in the very late 90s or early 2000s. I was grocery shopping with my mum at a Costco. For those of you who don't know the chain, it's basically a huge warehouse where everything is sold in bulk. Food, clothes, books. It's basically a Walmart, but if Walmart sold cereal boxes in counts of 3s, or frozen dinners by the dozen. My mum has a habit of pulling her grocery cart down to the side of the aisle in stores, and then walking the lengths of the shelves, picking up what she wants, and then coming back to the cart and dumping what she has in the basket. I don't get why she does it, but hey, mums do weird things. So I may be 4 or 5, sitting in the front basket playing with my Game Boy Color, when she pulls over next to a fruit display in Costco and tells me that she's going to look at different deals and sit tight. I wasn't a very fidgety kid, so I said no problem. She's gone for a couple of minutes. I am absorbed in Pokemon, so I don't really notice her walk up until the cart starts moving. Being a kid, I instinctively trust that she's pushing the cart. I was wrong. After a moment or two, I catch out the corner of my eye the vision of her red nails. This is a problem because my mum never paints her nails and never ever wears them long. I look up. The lady pushing the cart is a little older than my mother, same curly black hair, but pulled into a ponytail at the nape of her neck. I still remember she had tanned, Italian-type skin with thick red lips, a heavy coat of eyeliner and brown eyes. She was pretty skinny, her teeth were yellowed, and she smelled like what I didn't realise until later was bad BO. This wasn't my mum, and I said so, very loudly. She laughed and looked around and pushed the cart a little faster. I said it again, and she looked at me dead in the eyes and said, and perhaps I'm paraphrasing here because I don't remember the exact wording, "Oh sweetie, what a game you're playing, I am your mum." The way Costco is set up, at least ours, is that in the produce area, instead of aisles, they're more like islands. They're large square setups that you can see the entire length of the produce section if you walk that area. So of course, you can see my actual mother a few displays away. As loud as I could, I remember yelling, "Mum!" and watching her head whip around to look at me, right as this lady is trying to cover my mouth with her hand. I don't know if she decided then I wasn't worth it because I was so noisy, or if looking at my mother charging from a few displays over. Just a side note, my mum is not a petite woman. She's built like a linebacker and played roller derby and softball throughout college, up until I was about 10. She's more of an ox than a human woman, but that's why I appreciate her. But anyway, this woman squeezed her hand around my little face once and then booked it. My mum comes running up to me and starts asking me a million questions. My little brain thinks that all of a sudden I'm in trouble for using my outdoor voice, because she looks mad, so I start to cry. By the time she calmed me down, the lady was already gone, and we reported her to security. The store never found her inside, and security cam footage showed her leaving, but never with anyone else. I don't know why she picked me, or what it would have been for, but I'm just glad my real mum ended up scaring her away, and that nothing became of it.
This is literally just what happened within the past hour. I got out of work at 6:30 PM and went to McDonald's to get a nice coffee. I pull up to the drive-thru and there's a red truck in front of me with a cap on the bed. It's super wide, so I can't see their mirrors and thus get a glimpse of who's inside. I'm minding my own business, listening to unsolved mysteries when I see the red truck has pulled up to the second pickup window. I didn't think anything of it, just assuming they had a big order, and the McDonald's employee said to them to pull up while I get my coffee. I look up to see the truck's reverse lights are on. Okay, they must have pulled up a little too far and are backing up. No big deal. They just keep backing up without signalling to me that they're backing up. I slowly back up too. Luckily, no one is behind me. They keep backing up until they're finally parked at the first pickup window now. The McDonald's employee looks out the window at me, shrugs, gives me a look as though I don't know why they did that. A few minutes go by. By this point, I was just thinking about how strange and of non-etiquette it is to back up without signalling to anybody when you're doing so. They could have easily hit me if I was not looking straight ahead. Curious as to what they were doing. 5 minutes has gone by. No one's been given any food. I just want my coffee. I'm kind of annoyed that they backed up, thinking maybe they were told to go to the second window since I only needed the coffee, but they'd suddenly refused to do so. Anyway, I continue sitting there and wait for my food when I see the passenger door to the truck open. Out comes an older guy. He was wearing like khaki coloured overalls and a dirty t-shirt. He starts walking slowly over to my car. I'm thinking, maybe he's going to apologise to me for not signalling. He gets to my passenger door window, turns so he's facing the window head on, and glares at me. I'm waiting for him to signal to put my window down, thinking he has something to say. He doesn't. He just stands there and stares at me. He starts to lift his hand towards the door handle. I quickly lock the door. He goes back towards his truck, getting in the passenger side, frowning. They immediately drive away the second the door is shut. They didn't get food either. They just left. I pull up to the drive-thru to finally get my coffee. I'm now heading home. By now, I have more questions than answers. Why did they back up without signalling? Why was he about to open my door? Why didn't he say anything? Why didn't they get their food or drinks? It might not be the creepiest thing to happen, but I really don't know what to think of it. I was shaking the whole ride back.
Some background. I work summers as a camp counsellor in the northern part of Ontario, Canada. On the date this particular incident occurred, I was camping with a group of 10-year-old boys on the same lake the summer camp was based on. So, like a routine camping trip, we canoe out the site and set up our tents. Me and my co-counsellor, Mike, take turns supervising the kids while they swim, build forts and play games, etc. We cook some food over the fire, sit around and tell stories, cook s'mores, the typical Canadian camping experience. Around 9:30ish, I tell the kids it's time for bed and they head into the tents. Around 9:30ish, I tell the kids it's time for bed and they head into their tents, which were positioned a small walk away from the shoreline, but still in line of sight from where we had the fire pit. So the kids had gone to bed, and me and Mike are shooting the shit by the water, smoking a cigarette. Just basically hanging out before we decide to head into our tent and call it a night. What happened next still troubles me to this day, and remains my go-to scary campfire story. We were both gazing into the pitch black night water, when we saw a small light approaching us slowly and slightly above water level. We speculated what it could possibly be for a few minutes, before it came close enough to see that it was actually mounted on the front of the kayak, and that someone was approaching our campsite. Now, it's important to note that as a camp counsellor, part of our training goes over how to deal with a strange encounter in an environment where we're responsible for a group of children on public property. I was prepared to give the mystery paddler the typical speech about how we're camping with a group of recognised organisations, and we would respectfully ask that they find another campsite. However, this person's appearance shook me to the bone as the light drew nearer. Paddling this kayak was a woman, who looked to be in her 60s. She had incredibly long wisps of grey hair that were trailing in the water. Her skin looked like old leather, and her dead-looking eyes were tough to spot under all her wrinkles. She looked directly at me, and when she spoke, I realised she was missing most of her teeth. "Are all of your children safe in bed?" she asked me, pointing in the direction of the tents. Not really knowing how to respond, and quite frankly, I was terrified. I responded by telling her that they were all fine and that she had to leave. "That's good, just as expected for this time," she said with a smile, then turned her kayak and paddled off into the night. At this point in time, myself and Mike were legitimately really creeped out, not only by the appearance of this mystery woman who had resembled a freaking corpse, but also her inquiry about the whereabouts and safety of the kids we had brought to the trip. Not knowing what else to do, we grabbed our hunting knives and sat by the fire checking on the kids. Half-hour later is where it got really creepy. Across the lake, a female counsellor was leading another trip for kids the same age group. She sent me a text which read something along the lines of, "Hey Sean, stop screwing with us, this isn't funny, my kids are really creeped out." I instantly called her and let her know I had just seen someone near my campsite that seemed eerie, and that I was not trying to play a joke. Apparently one of her kids had opened their tent door to take a pee, and seen a woman with long hair, standing with her arms open towards them near the shoreline. This happened about 6 years ago. If I'm remembering the year correctly, I'm pretty sure I was 11 at the time. It was my first ever overnight stay at a summer camp, and I was pretty excited. This particular camp had a system where it normally functioned as a day camp, but there was one night each week where kids would stay overnight. I was a socially awkward kid, so I had avoided these overnight stays as much as possible. But this one time I decided to be brave, have some fun and try it myself. Only after did I regret it. So before I explain what happened, I'll briefly give an outline of the camp. It was situated near the shore of an island lake, which had very few houses on it. My camping group decided to take advantage of that, and agreed to set up a few feet away from the shore, in a small clearing located near a small path. Much of the shoreline was walled off by low-lying thornery underbrush, including the area we were in. So, flash forward to night time. We've set up our tents and sleeping bags, we've eaten our s'mores, and we've set up our sleeping arrangements. I'm in a large tent with 3 other boys, sitting a few feet off from a path that runs through the clearing. We whisper amongst ourselves, talking about the best camp activities, crushes, the nicest counsellors, you know, usual summer camp stuff. We're just about to say our goodnights when we hear the faint hum of a motor coming from the lake. It's unusual for people to be out late at night on a motorboat on a small, isolated lake, but we initially blow it off as being some person fishing. However, the noise grows louder, and I begin to hear what sounds like drunk people crackling. At first, this isn't scary for me. I assume it's just drunk people having some late night summer fun, and my tent mates agree. We try to ignore it, but we started getting nervous when the crackling and chatter quieted. I hear the engine shut off, and it sounds like the people were quietly disembarking at the camp's fishing dock, which was a few hundred feet away. For a couple of minutes after, I hear total silence. We were terrified. Two of my tent mates are completely still, while the other is fidgeting and shaking. Looking back on it, it wasn't even like this should have been especially scary, but something felt distinctly off about the whole situation. My gut instincts were right. I started hearing slow, methodical footsteps, creeping slowly along the path. It's clear this intruder is intent on being as quiet as possible, but it's easy to hear when someone's walking in a forest full of sticks, mud and leaves. I'm listening to their steps as they approach our campsite at a painfully slow pace, when suddenly they stop and grunt. At this point, it's clear that it's 1. A man, 2. Not a person who should be here, and 3. Someone who was watching us when we set up the campsite. There was no way he could have known where we were without watching us from another part of the lake. The man stands what feels like an eternity before he begins to move again, but the sound I hear terrifies me. He's moving towards my tent. All my tent mates are laying completely still, mortified but not moving a muscle. He approaches our tent, walking right up to it so we can see the silhouettes of his legs outlined by the faint moonlight. He stands for another 2 seconds. Then he places his finger on the tent. He drags it across the tent, then begins to walk. The man traces the entire perimeter of the tent with one finger. He holds it there for a few seconds after, then grunts again and slowly walks to another tent. My mates are all terrified, and we're all looking at each other like a deer in headlights. We hear him move from tent to tent, walking around each one, with each trace feeling like it took longer than the last. Finally, he walks slowly back to the path, grunts once more, and walks away quietly in the direction he came. A few minutes later, I hear the motor on the boat starting up, before hearing its sound fade into the distance. The counsellors who slept through the whole ordeal were convinced that we were faking the incident to prank them. Those of us that reported it to them were ignored, and it's something that I hold against the camp to this day. I still don't know what happened to the other people on the boat, where they went, or why one of them even came to our campsite in the first place, but that's my creepy summer camp story.